In this video, we're going to go through everything that you need to know about insuring your whiskey bottle collection. So welcome back to the channel, everyone, and as you can see, I am not alone. I've got Alex Richards here from Bruce Stevenson, and we're going to go through everything that you need to know about insuring your whiskey collection. And I thought it'd be good to get Alex in, so rather than you hearing from me telling you about what I think, we'll get an expert from the industry, because it's quite niche, it's regulated, and there's a lot of things that you need to know. And of course, if you look in the comments below, you'll see a discount code for a policy with Bruce Stevenson. So if you are thinking of insuring, use that discount code to get a discount. But first of all, Alex, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself briefly?
Yeah, so as I say, I work for Bruce Stevenson Insurance Brokers. I've been in the insurance world for longer than I care to remember or think about now. But historically, always looking after people's collections, whether, obviously that's now whiskey, but can only be for anything teddy bears, artworks, walking sticks. I've seen all sorts of exciting collections over the many years that I've been in the sector, and whiskey is obviously a really exciting area to be in now. And we established a sort of a specialist whiskey policy about 5 years ago now for bottled collections, just spotting that niche in the market where there was requirement for such a policy. And
that's what we've sort of found, and this is why I thought it'd be great to get Alex in, because you might think that your collection's covered on your home insurance policy, and I think that's what you may have in place, but me and you have chatted, haven't we? Like, there are quite a lot of problems about home insurance policies with whiskey, especially, isn't there?
Yeah, so that's exactly as I say how it started with establishing a policy for whiskey collections, because clients historically have insured them under their household risks. However, your sort of standard household insurance policy doesn't usually like to insure items once they get above a certain value, and they quite often restrict the cover to items with values of £2,000 or £1,500 or less. Sometimes it could be a bit more, sometimes a bit less than that. But so it meant that your average client with your average household insurance cover suddenly had an asset that was increasing in quite substantial value, and their home insurers now have decided that they don't want to insure that collection. It's become too valuable, and also the cover provided under the household is not specialist enough, if you like, for a collection of this nature, because there are certain, without going into too much technical detail, there are certain nuances that a collection warrants having within an insurance policy, things like restoration and depreciation cover and things like that, which you wouldn't ordinarily find under a household general contents policy.
And that's the thing with bottles of whiskey, like, you gotta, like, let's take Folio 1 for instance. It's a £15,000 vessel of whiskey stored in a glass jar. They're very, I assume, risky items for insurers to take on, are they? Yeah,
they are, but actually collections, whiskey and other collections as well, people tend to really look after them, because it's their passion, and so they are more protected, if you like, or looked after than your chairs and tables. Yeah. So whilst it is a greater risk to insurers, they are, generally speaking, better taken care of by individuals. So it's a bit of a way up between the two. So
can you sort of tell us about the Bruce Stevenson policy in terms of what it covers?
Yeah, so it's what's called an all risks of physical loss or damage policy, which basically means it's only a short policy wording compared to what you might find with your household, which goes on for tens of pages, whereas this is about sort of 5-7 pages long. And essentially, your collection is insured for all risks of physical loss or damage. So that includes things like accidental damage, fire, flood, theft, all the sort of perils that you can really imagine, and also I think crucially insures items whilst in transit, so whilst outside the home, which again is not something that you may ordinarily find within your household policy. This is a real benefit to clients. I often get asked, what does it include if I bought something from auction? Will it cover me whilst I'm transporting that from the auction house?
Easy. I think that's a really important point to make as well, and I think we'll come back to the goods in transit, because I don't think a lot of people are quite aware of the need for that. But in terms of the risk, so let's just sort of say I've got a little 4-year-old boy at home, I've got a collection of whiskey at home. if he was sort of running around and bumped into the shelf and the shelves broke that stored the whiskey, is that the sort of thing that would be covered on the policy?
And we've had exactly that kind of scenario where a shelf has literally collapsed and the bottles have slid off and smashed to the ground, and that scenario is exactly covered. It's an accident that's occurred. So, and I would suggest that probably the most claims that we see are accidental damage. Another classic one is a box is picked up and it's
the bomb's gone through.
Exactly. Hopefully you've not experienced it. So the accidents, and then of course when things get moved is another time when claims occur. And we have actually recently experienced some flooding as well.
Yeah, and I think that was so I know this customer as well. He writes a whiskey blog. We'll put his blog down below for you, because he stored his whiskey in a self-storage facility. So rather than keeping all his whiskey at home, he stored them at a self-storage facility, thinking this is going to be the safest place I can keep them, away from the kids and away from everything. And lo and behold, I think the facility was flooded, wasn't it? And
it was, yeah. I mean, so we've obviously been having so many freak 1 in 100 year weather occurrences of late. And this particular storage facility was completely overwhelmed by drains that backed up, and so the units on the ground floor were flooded essentially. And the client in question, had amazing risk management. So he'd done every sort of mitigation that he could do to protect himself, and also his documentation, the support documents that he had in relation to his collection were brilliant.
Yeah.
Which meant that meant a much cleaner, efficient, more sped up claims process for him, because he was so well prepared.
And I think with this client as well, there wasn't really, what's interesting with this one, and this is the madness of the whiskey market now, the bottles themselves hadn't smashed, they hadn't broken, but the labels had all been damaged with the water damage. So all the water had come off, or the labels had been damaged, and it was that was claimed against, because obviously
he's still got the bottle was still in its integrity, but there was a sort of slight adjustment to the values of the bottle as a result of the labels, or some of the packaging or specialist boxing had been damaged. So the loss adjuster worked with a specialist on that to establish what sort of loss had occurred as a result in terms of value, and that was what was then settled out.
And I think let's, rather than just talking about the good points of insurance, let's talk about the things that you're not going to be covered for, because normally these are the things that you have to delve well deep into the terms and conditions to find, because there are things. Let's get a bottle up here. Let's get this Macallan 10-year-old, for instance. There are a number of things that we can sort of say can be damaged. So we can say that the labels can fall off. That sounds like it's covered. Smashing the bottle, but is there like any inherent vice that the policy won't cover, for instance?
So there are about 8 or 9 exclusions within the policy, which again for an insurance policy is not very many.
No.
And it tends to do with the integrity of the bottle. So as you say, and any inherent defect within the bottle, but also it relates to things like how the bottle would be stored. So you do have a responsibility to make sure that you are looking after your collection. So any damage that occurs to the contents as a result of exposure to light, for example, or extremes of temperature, they are excluded because you're not showing due diligence with the protection of your collection.
And I assume something like a cork dropping from the capsule into the bottle, which would happen on very old bottles. We've got like a 1950s bottle of rum here. If that cork dropped in there, I assume that's something that isn't insurable?
That would probably be a bit debatable, because when essentially you probably... Well, I should also point out that as soon as a collection is opened in any way, that is also not covered. So if the cork falls in by accident, it's a bit difficult to determine that, because you shouldn't be opening it. So hopefully it's not being done because unless a 5-year-old has gone and
maliciously done it,
put their thumb through it. So that's a slightly a little one to determine. But any sort of tampering with the bottle to make it not what it is it wouldn't be covered. No.
So it's a bit of a grey area then if the cork drops in, but it seems that most eventualities for your collection, importantly, are covered. So let's sort of look at where it's going to be covered then, because obviously there's a number of different places that people store the whiskey.
So a lot of clients now are phoning saying, I've got to move my collection out of the house, it's taking over. And they decide to move it into either a self-storage facility or a more professional facility. And the self-storage, so the policy enables you to cover your collection at multiple locations. All we need to do is make sure we know where those locations are, and what percentage of the collection is stored there. With regards to self-storage facilities, the cover tends to be limited at around 220,000, might go up to 250,000 depending on circumstances. Insurers tend to limit their liability at that, at that level, because they feel after that it really needs to go into a specialist facility.
Self-storage is, as you probably know, you get a little flimsy padlock. It's probably not enough to cover your big collection. And that's when people often go to the likes of LCB and Octavian for big heavy hitting collections. And would that mean that your policy would cover likes of LCB and Octavian, so you didn't have to take out their policies within it?
Absolutely, and a blend of the two. So they might have some at the self-storage facility and some at the more specialist facility that you mentioned, and indeed they may still keep some of it at home. So, and actually that's a better risk, because the risk has been spread around between different locations. So it's not all going to go in a one-er if there was a fire, for example.
And then let's come back to this sort of goods in transit then, because obviously if you're storing in multiple locations, not just at your home, you're obviously having to sort of move them around. So there's a couple of sort of eventualities that the viewers might be sort of having, and that is sort of like, one, they're moving their collection in their car, they're driving it themselves to a new facility for storage, and then also like postage. So if an auctioneer posts something to them, or they then post it to their like LCB account or Octavian account, what parts of the transit's covered if you start like with a car travel?
So under the private collections policy, the cover is worldwide, so it doesn't actually restrict any movements at all. Obviously you are responsible for making sure it's packed adequately to withstand the course of transit. Again, that goes back to making sure that you're taking reasonable care of your collection and undertaking
and
due
I think
diligence.
I'll just nip out a shot a second, because these are amazing. So we use these air sacks.
Yeah, great.
And this is how we send all our bottles out, and if you're looking to transport them the same, we double bag them now as well. So you put one bag in, you put your bottle in here and then bag it, and then you can inflate another bag around it. So if you're looking to do anything, these air sacks really are.
Yeah, they're brilliant, and the double bagging, obviously, because if one gets punctured, you've got that belts and braces back
which
up.
happens at altitude when you're flying on these aircrafts, and the pressure changes. You might have one slightly overinflated and it pops. You've then always got a backup there.
Yeah,
so
exactly. So it's a again, as I say, a feature over the household insurance policy, where quite often you have to tick a box to say yes, you would like cover for items outside the home, and often that can get missed, and it's subject to certain subjectivities and what have you. But the cover is worldwide under the Whisky policy, and which is really useful when you're acquiring new whisky from auction house and you want to take it straight away with you. Then you can. Likewise, if you're moving it, as you say, between the different locations, the cover is there.
And just to clarify then, let's say that you've bought a bottle at an auction house, and these auction houses do often offer their own insurance policy to cover it from transport from the auction house to you. Does this policy cover that leg from the auction house to getting it into your property, or is that not included in it?
Yeah, as soon as the hammer goes down and you own the bottle, it's covered whilst.
Which will save money, everyone. Like these, the insurance rates when you tick these boxes, it's normally at 1.5% or 2%. If you're buying a lot each year, that will add up quite significantly. So if you've got it covered under this policy, it's all good. And then, I guess the other things that we need to sort of start looking at is like how much do you need to insure your collection for? And this is an area that I've got a lot of experience in. So doing valuations, not just of whiskey, but of lots of other items, because like whiskey is a fantastic example, because you might have a bottle of Macallan Private Eye at auction, for instance, that might be a hammer price of $5,000, so near enough $6,000 after fees, but then to buy at a retailer might be $8,000 or $10,000. So how do you determine what is the best value to list for the cover of your bottles?
So again, this is a question we get asked a lot by clients, and because of the way the whisky market is moving, most clients want to insure for the market value, and that is indeed the basis of settlement under the policy. It's basically the fair market value at the time of loss, or the clients can insure, and this is something that's done less in the whisky world. It's done more with other types of collections, for what we call their agreed value, and that's supported by a professional valuation by an independent valuer such as yourself, Mark, and that is agreed between the insurer and the client, that those are what the values are going to be, and in the event of any loss or damage, those values are referred to. They're specifically listed out in the schedule of coverage, and so there's no dispute in the event of a claim happening that is the amount that will be settled. But that's not something that happens a lot in the whisky world at all. It tends to be fair market value. We obviously make it clear to clients that can mean going down as well as going up. So it's important to point out that although the whisky market is generally doing that, at the time of loss it's fair market value, and if that has gone down, then you may get less than what you paid for it, for example.
And so when you pay out, then does that include buyer's commission? Because obviously that does okay, perfect. So it's all eventualities there. And I think as well that the beauty of tracking the open market really is that, as you've said, if you insured your Macallan Folio 1 a year ago and it was paid out an agreed price for that would be significantly different to the current market value because it's jumped hugely. So
but it is also important to make sure that at the anniversary of the policy, which is 12 months later, that you have then re-established your value and given as near as you can correct market value for the next 12 months. So
let's sort of look at this then. So how much, which is the obvious thing, how much does all this cost, and sort of like what is the bands for sort of levels of cover, if that makes sense?
So obviously that varies. That totally depends on where insurers are at with all their actual actuary information and claims and all sorts of data that goes into that. But at the moment, and we're now April 2022.
April 2022,
you can insure for collections that are under £100,000 in value. We provide a policy which is a premium of £351. That includes your 12%, which is currently your 12% insurance premium tax, and we have an admin fee on top of that as well. So that's what anything that's over 100,000 is then subject to the insurer's specific rating.
So you can get basically £100,000 worth of cover for around £350.
Exactly, which is great because although some clients might only have a £10,000 collection, I say only, but a £10,000 collection, for example, that would be nice, wouldn't it? It does mean that if they're acquiring, or if their value is going up, they've got a lot of headroom there before they'd have to pay any additional premium for any new acquisitions and so on and so forth. So it creates quite a nice buffer there.
Yeah, and I think that's as you can see, this isn't a sales pitch for Bruce Stevenson, by the way. It's just that I know Alex, I've known Alex for a long time, and I don't know, I can personally endorse this product because I know people who've claimed on it, I know people who've been paid out on it, and, as you can see, Alex really knows the policy and what you guys are buying, whereas I'm not aware of many of the policies that cover specifically whisky bottle collections, and I think that's what's great about this. And don't forget there's a discount code below, so check that out if you are going to take a policy out. But so now that we know so it's about £350 for £100,000 worth of cover, I assume you can bolt on. It won't just be like a pro rata increase. There might be a small decrease. So let's say £200,000. It's probably not going to cost you £700, but it will cost somewhere in between the two.
Yeah.
Perfect. And then, let's assume someone's got their cover in place now. What do they need to do to record their collection? Because that's a really important part of this process.
And again, it's a question that we ask on we ask clients to complete a fact find form just to give us the information about the risk. So most clients are so passionate about their collections that they are really all over keeping Excel spreadsheets in inventories on it. They're cross-checking that against current market conditions. If they don't have that in place, we highly suggest that you do. Going back to the conversation we had earlier about when it comes to making a claim, if you can produce receipts if you have them, and obviously not everybody does because quite a lot of people may have inherited collections, for example, but if you have receipts of any recent acquisitions or even old ones and have kept them, that's great. Use those and add that information to your inventory if you can. And also, we also ask, again, it's not a requirement, but if you could take photographs. Again, a picture speaks 1,000 words, and it just helps you to remember what you've got, what condition the items are in, just which situation that it was in. And photographs, inventories, receipts, when it comes to making a claim, if you can produce as much documentation to evidence your claim and the circumstances of the loss, then you will have a better claims experience.
And I think that's the thing, just get your phone out. take a photograph of every bottle that you add to your collection, stick it on a folder on Google Drive or somewhere on your computer that's safe, because we've done so many insurance valuations over the years. It's a bit easier with bottles because it's an easier thing to describe. A Macallan 1969 18-year-old is always going to be the same compared to jewellery, for instance, which is where you would normally want to photograph it in case you had to commission a jeweller to remake an exact model. But photograph is so easy, and don't even just do them all. Like, you can line 5 bottles up at a time quite easily,
or even an entire shelf. Again, clients who might not have put an inventory together and have a loss because the shelf breaks, let's say, but if they've got a photo and they go, yes, I had that one and that one, and it serves as a useful memory jogger.
Yeah, and I think, and like with that then, how often do you need to update those values? Would it just be at the renewal of the policy, I take it?
Yeah, so the market value, as we just alluded to, at the anniversary of the policy, which is after 12 months, you need to check that the current sum insured is fairly reflective of what that collection would cost in today's market.
Yeah, and then I mean that's a really sort of comprehensive overview of sort of like your insurance for bottles. But like, the one thing that I didn't touch upon, is there anything that would void the policy? So like disaster plan. I assume we've mentioned opening the bottles will void the cover on that. Is there anything else that will void the cover?
As I said earlier, you are responsible. There is a condition within the policy that you have to take reasonable due care and diligence with the collection. So again, making sure, as we've talked about storage, for example, making sure that you're looking after your collection is kind of key. If you're trying to make a claim for whiskey that was very dark, has now gone really light, and that's not going to happen because you've clearly not been storing it in the right circumstances. Recklessly providing incorrect information or fraud, is not something that it's something that's going to probably void your policy. But essentially, no, as I say, there's only really the sort of the handful of exclusions that are there, which, as I say, relate to the sort of the storage of the policy, the storage of the collection, how it's looked after, making sure it's kept away from sort of insects and vermin and things like that, which can cause trouble. Let's
be really cynical here, because I'm a cynical person by nature, but what about under-insuring the collection? So let's say that you've got 500 grand's worth of cover and you only take out one policy for 100 grand or something, so you knowingly under-declare the value that you've got. Does that again goes back to the point about recklessly providing incorrect information, which will allow insurers to either cancel the policy or not pay out the claim or impose other terms and conditions and so on. It's totally their prerogative as to how they wish to view it. And I know people in the past with antiques have tried to under-insure their collections, and in the event of a claim, either the payout was pro rata reduced by the amount that they've done. So don't even think about.
Don't do that. It's not worth it, and it doesn't benefit anybody at the end of the day. The insurers are not getting the correct premium for the risk that they are insuring. You won't be getting the correct payment in the eventuality of loss or damage. It's better to be as transparent as you can.
Yeah. Well, I think we've covered everything there, and I think a big thank you for Alex for taking the time to come out here today. The discount code's down below, and me and Alex will be in the comments answering any questions that you have about this, and we hope it's been useful. And if there's anything that we've missed, if there's any sort of areas of this sort of world of insuring your whiskey that you need or want us to cover, get in the comments down below and we'll be happy to help.